I nearly had a bit of a panic there. My streaming software wouldn't bring up the stream. It just came up, oh, which stream do you want? There's no streams. Fortunately, I just had to reset it. Right, so we're going to be discussing, to begin with, we've actually got lots of things to discuss today, potentially. We're going to start off with, again, the Reform UK speech, shall we say, earlier this week. I did a video talking about how the maths of it doesn't add up. Put simply, Nigel Farage is promising lots of tax cuts and he's promising lots of spending, and what he says he will cut to pay for it doesn't mostly exist. There's a few £billion a year which actually exists. He could in theory cut, bad idea to cut it, but he could. But in actual fact, most of what he says he would cut doesn't actually exist as government expenditure right now, which means it's fantasy. So basically he's offering massive tax cuts, massive amounts of extra spending, no way to pay for it. But that's just one way of looking at it. There are others as well. And I want to look at this from a couple of little angles. Now, the first one is, and this is related to the title, and it is the Independent. They've actually done a few articles critically evaluating Farage's little statements. And in one of them, they produce some, or they report on some research. Let me find it. Because let us begin with the big one in terms of spending, one of the big ones, which is also tax cuts, which is the raising the personal allowance to £20,000. So at the moment it's about £12,500. I can't remember exactly what it is. It's about £12,500. That means if you earn or your income is up to that amount, you don't pay income tax. So anything up to about this £12,500, you don't pay income tax on it at all. And then after that, you pay income tax of 20% up to whatever the next breakpoint is. I can't remember what that is either. About 50,000. But then if you're earning over 100,000, it sort of goes away type thing. But never mind that now. So Farage is presenting this because obviously this would appeal to people on lower incomes, right? Appeal to, like, you know, that's like £7,500 where you now keep an extra, it's worth, you would think, £1,500 a year to you. Now, if you're on quite a low income, that's over £100 a month. That's pretty tasty. Except no, it's not. Because, as the Independent point out, if you're on a low income, you're probably getting working tax credits or something similar, like some sort of benefits, universal credit. And the thing is, if your threshold was increased, if the threshold was increased, that means that your effective take home increases as well, which means they'll just take it up. Whatever you gain in terms of these taxes saved, you will just lose in working tax credits. You'll lose in universal credit. So in a lot of cases, people on low, and also remember, there are some people on low incomes, like, you know, pensioners mostly, but there are some as well, or part-time on minimum wage, who are not earning the threshold as it is. So it does nothing for the lowest income. It does nothing for the lowest income people. It does for the people who are sort of betwixt and between, but still on low incomes. It still does nothing because you're not going to, you're just going to have, you give with one hand, you take with the other. This is something that actually is more beneficial for people on incomes where you're actually sort of all right to begin with. And for what? For nothing. But I can show you a chart. They produced a chart. It's really quite illuminating, just to show how his tax policies in general, this isn't just this one, but how are they in general, are going to affect people. So what we've got here, from the left to the right, I don't know why they've labelled it 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. But basically, you've got the 10 deciles there. So on the extreme left-hand side, you've got what you'd call the bottom decile, which is the bottom 10% of earners or incomes. Then the next one along is the 10 to 20%, and so on. And then the final one, you've got your top decile, which is your top 10%, right? So what you can see is The ones right at the bottom, and these are percentages. This is what percentage of their net income will change. So you can see the very bottom decile, it's the overall package that Nigel Farage presented is worth about 1.3% to them. So their income would improve by 1.3%. The top decile would improve by 4.2%. But, and this is another really important point, these are percentages. The top decile get paid a lot more than the bottom decile. So let us just imagine that on the bottom decile, you've got someone who's on, say, £10,000, right? So that I'm just going to read it properly, 1.3%, that 1.3% for them is basically 13 quid. 130 quid over the year. 130 quid. But someone on £100,000 who would be in the top decile, that's 4.2%. So that's like £4,200. So it's not even just percentages, because the people higher up the deciles have more money, they have a higher income. That if the percentages were the same across the board, it still wouldn't be equal, because the people further up are getting more. So basically, his tax plans, would you believe it? I mean, you could have knocked me down with a feather, disproportionately benefit the rich. Would you believe that? And I thought we'd mention this in stream, because I didn't actually mention that. I was talking about it purely from an adding up point of view. Do the figures balance up? And of course, massively did not. And in fact, there was a comment just here. Hang on, someone. Matthew there saying, Farage's PM would be worse than Truss. Yes, and in at least two ways connected to this. Tory MPs have the decency to remove her. I wouldn't call it decency. It was survival. It was self-survival. But nonetheless, yes, had the decency to remove her when she nearly crashed the economy. Reform UK MPs would not have the moral authority to remove Farage. So I'm glad you said that, because that is one of the two reasons why, yes, indeed, he would be worse. The other is, of course, because his plans are literally, as I showed in that video earlier this week, would create 10 times the hole in the budget that Liz Truss created. Now, can I really fairly say 10 times as much? Maybe, maybe not. Because we know that Liz Truss actually wanted to follow through on her plans, because she got her Chancellor to announce them, right? It was official. Nigel Farage, if he won power, may well decide actually he doesn't want to do it. But I'll tell you what's really interesting. I was just watching something earlier today. I haven't finished watching it. There's a new podcast. It's just getting started. It's run by one of the guys you may know. They're both sort of, very Labour. One of them you may know as the Labour's candidate for Clacton. And they were talking to someone who's been a former Labour advisor as well. But, he's been doing GB News and stuff like that. He's not Reform. But he was saying, because he talks to people around Nigel Farage a lot. And he doesn't think Nigel Farage wants to be Prime Minister. I'm not so sure. Obviously, he speaks to people. I mean, I'm just judging from afar. He's closer to it. I don't know whether he does or he doesn't. It depends on a lot of things. But if he doesn't, then again, he's just doing this because why not offer the earth if you'll never be put in a position of having to deliver? But then it begs the question: if you don't think Nigel Farage wants to win the election. And then you think to yourself, so what does he want? What does he want? But anyway, that was the first little thing. I did want to mention one other little thing as well, because, and this is really important for just if you ever are able to talk, I'm not suggesting you go out and deliberately try and find Reform UK supporters, but if you happen to be talking to one, and, it's just important to be able to ask a few questions. The other one that's really key for me, so this is another one where he basically made up some savings. So there's Byline Times have produced some analysis on it. I haven't put their link in the description below. I'll have to remember to do that after the stream, hopefully. But they make, so Nigel Farage claimed he could save 7 billion with DEI savings. I'm going to come on to that in a moment. Labour unions have also presented it. And effectively, it doesn't exist, by the way. The funding he's talking about is £27 million. Comes to 27 million. And is, of course, very beneficial. I'll go over it in a minute, because I think there are two questions that people from Reform UK should be asked. First of all, they need to be told, sorry, it doesn't cost 7 billion. I mean, first of all, this DEI thing is imported from America, but the concept exists. But we call it equal opportunities, don't we? But the concept is still the same. So I'm not going to quibble over the line, even though you just say to them, why is he using American terms? Why is he using American terms? Keep asking themselves that. You know, if he's a true blue Brit, right, why does he keep using foreign terms for things when we've got our own terms? Thank you very much. But their £7 billion doesn't exist. 27 million, that's not going to pay for much of a tax cut. But the other question I just want to ask is, I would ask these people, whenever, and I occasionally do come across these people, or haven't come across any since the big, speech. What do you think DEI is? And why do you think the millionaire Nigel Farage is against it? Why would an ordinary person be against it? Because it is an American term. And for those who don't know, DEI is diversity, equity, inclusion, right? Why would any normal person want to be against that, right? Because what you're saying is, if you don't come from it, we know that we have a bit of, we're not a meritocracy in this country. We are better than we were, but we're not a meritocracy. What that means is there are some people, because of their background, cannot get into certain jobs. So I would ask an ordinary person who supports Reform UK, why do you think it's wrong that because you come from a certain background and you want to do a certain job, you shouldn't be allowed? Think about if they've got children. If, let's say they're a dock worker or something, but their kid is bright and wants to be a doctor. Attacking DEI is saying to that kid shouldn't be a doctor because, sorry, you should just, you should do whatever your background is. It's like, why? That's keeping people down. Why shouldn't people be able to train for whatever profession they want to do, and if they're good enough, get into it? Because that's what DEI does. They try and tell you it's putting people in place who are not qualified just to tick quota boxes. But that's nonsense, because you can't put someone in a job that they can't do, because you need the job done, right? You need the job done. So you obviously have to put people in it who can do it. It's a way of making sure that you don't have prejudice artificially keeping people down. And that's what people need explaining. DEI, equal opportunities, we generally call it in this country, but it's the same concept. It's not about giving people a leg up. It's actually about stopping them being pushed down. That's what it is. We call it EDI, right? No, we call it equal opportunities. There may be other terms as well, but there we go. DEI is the new term for woke, which is preceded by the term political correctness. Well, people did rage against political correction, but I mean, what I would say is there were some times when actually I am going to say some people thought they were being politically. They used to come up with all sorts of some of the things that came up in teaching. Didn't catch on, thankfully, because do you know what? Real political correction, it wasn't attacking anyone's free expression or anything. It was just a way of saying, can you not use insulting terms? Because what people like, if you're someone like me, you're white and now middle-aged. At the time I wasn't, I was young. When political correction was a term that was used in the 80s and 90s, right? So I was growing up, right? But I'm still white, and I'm in a largely white community, so I didn't really suffer prejudice at all when I was growing up. So why? So you can understand someone from my sort of background. The majority of people don't really face in-your-face prejudice, certainly the majority of men. And therefore, they will think to yourself, well, it's just words in it. How can words hurt you? It's because no one's really... You might have had a bit of bullying as a kid, but you probably never had like real nasty bullying that only someone who has can understand it. So all political correction is saying, look, the English language is full of really good words that you can use to express your meaning without hurting someone. Why don't you use those words instead? But there were some ridiculous ones as well. I'm going to get onto some of the comments here, sorry, in the member comments. But there were some ridiculous ones. Like someone in a place I worked as a teacher, I won't say where, tried to get us to talk about, instead of saying a kid had failed, right? We were, oh no, that's too negative, right? Do you know what we were supposed to call it? Deferred success. That was ridiculous, right? I mean, no one made the kid feel bad if they didn't pass, but you are never going to get me without a lot of research. I mean, you know, if it was the sort of thing that would absolutely help the mental health of a student, sure, absolutely, right? I did not believe that handing a paper to a kid and saying, I've given you a mark of deferred success was going to help them. But anyway, right, go through some of these member comments. How many chances do we think McSweeney will get? Honestly, couldn't tell you. I don't know whether it's like a Lady Macbeth thing, in too deep. Like, they got rid of Sue Gray. Sue Gray, there was absolutely... The reasons for getting Sue Gray in the position were bang on. It was a brilliant move. I was all over it when it happened. I thought it was a stunning coup, brilliant idea, absolutely superb. One of the biggest problems, and it's not just in this country, Barack Obama used to complain about it. Barack Obama, normally we're used to US presidents being quite old, yeah? We've certainly had very old ones since him. But even before him, we had ones who were fairly experienced. Like Bill Clinton wasn't ancient, but he'd been around the block a few times, hadn't he? So, and the reason for that is because it takes you a long time to learn how to get politics done in America. I mean, a lot of countries, I suppose, but it's quite complex in America. So Barack Obama came in relatively young, relatively inexperienced, and he didn't know what to do. Like, he had the right ideas, don't get me wrong. It's not like he had no policies, but he didn't know how to get them in there. And by the time he'd learned, it was too late. He'd lost his majority, right, in the House, or in both houses, actually. So, but that's the way it is in politics. You come in to power, you've got all these great ideas. You think you've got these policies, right? Civil service, make these policies happen, please. Happens all the time. Because all the time, everyone, every single prime minister who's ever existed has said the same thing. Oh, it took me so by the time I learned how to do things, it was time to shuffle off. So the idea of Keir Starmer getting as his chief of staff, someone who knew how Whitehall works, senior member of it, very experienced, could tell him exactly how to get things done. Brilliant move. Why had no one else done that before? Brilliant move. Then he sacked her. Why? Because Morgan McSweeney whined. We were told that a load of other staffers were whining. Why should she get more money than the Prime Minister? No, it's a power struggle, wasn't it? And we've seen multiple power struggles, you know, but it may be a Lady Macbeth in too deep type thing, because maybe he thinks, like, as far as I can tell, not everyone necessarily, but a lot of the key figures in 10 Downing Street now are McSweeney's picks. So it's like, if you get rid of him, it might be that the whole operation... I'm not suggesting that Keir Starmer thinks he should get rid of him, by the way. He may still have faith in him. But, you know, I'd be maybe looking at it and thinking, even if he did think, bloody hell, this is going a bit tits up, you get rid of McSweeney and you're still stuck with... Like, you get rid of all of them, then you've got to start building a team from scratch while you're really struggling in the polls. Is it a sunk cost fallacy? That's what I'm thinking. Is McSweeney a sunk cost fallacy that they think it's better to try and fix the problems a bit at a time than it is to just change the whole team? And maybe it is, I don't know, but that's what I would be thinking. But something is fundamentally wrong with the whole operation. Question of obscenity, it's off topic, that's fine, I think we've done this topic. Why is it acceptable for Rachel Reeves and previous chancellors to sell NatWest shares at a loss when FTSE 100 gone up 90% in the same period? I really don't know the ins and outs of that one. I strongly suspect because they need the money, if I'm honest. I'm not going to try and claim that it's not a good long-term decision, but they need the money in the short term. But that may be what it is. I mean, I really couldn't tell you, but that is what I would imagine. It was always the intention to sell the shares, and I think it was always understood that they would sell them at a loss. Is it right to sell them right now, or are they just doing it to plug up the numbers? We know they need to shore up the numbers, so it could just be for that. That is certainly why Jeremy Hunt wanted to do it. We actually technically put a bit of a pause on it, but then, yeah, we've done it again, haven't we? Tim Ballon there donating a membership. Thank you very much. Putting aid to the same, physically disabled, wheelchair bound, and experienced bullying. Also love making jokes about a disability and being called ableist for making them. I mean, some people really do. Like, the problem is that some words are used to dehumanize you. And so, I mean, the way I see it is, and there are terms I've used in the past that I didn't mean any harm by them. But, you know, if people are saying to me, look, this is actually, you know, this actually seriously affects someone's mental health, can you not say it? It's like, well, okay. As long as I believe, I'm not just going to, if someone randomly just says that in the comments, oh, can you stop using the word politics? It triggers anxiety attacks in me. I'm going to say, sorry, you're not selling it to me. But the English language is a rich language, right? It's a hybrid language. It's a mongrel language. So we've got loads of terms for most things. Loads of terms. That's why we need a thesaurus. So yeah, it's really very easy in most cases. If a particular term is unpleasant enough to be damaging to society, it's really just easy to just use a different term. I mean, I'm not in favour of like bashing people for maybe using a term that they don't understand. Like, there's people in this country still will say, innocently, they're not pro-Russia or anything like that. They're actually trying to support Ukraine, but they may call it the Ukraine, you know, its Soviet name. Or we may still in this country, a lot of people will say Kiev rather than Kyiv, because we had chicken Kievs for like decades. We're used to it. We love it. It's brilliant. And people just, they're not doing it. And it's the thing, you can sometimes, like, because the pro-Russian trolls, they do it deliberately. They will say the Ukraine and they will say Kiev, right, every single time, because they know that's the Soviet word. But most other people in the country sort of say the same thing, but they just don't realise. No one's really told them. So, you know, I tend to avoid like bashing people for doing something where it could just be an innocent mistake as well. But I also have no issue with someone saying, look, you know, this actually causes serious problems for people, you know, and it can cause such anxiety that you prevent people. Some words, some terms are actually a barrier to social mobility. But anyway, there it is. Sue Gray's reputation was tarnished by the Tory media because of the appointment due to her role in Partygate. She lasted less than 3 months as chief of staff. Utterly pointless. The reputation was not. It was tarnished amongst Tories. That didn't matter. She was Starmer's chief of staff. It's irrelevant what the Tories thought of her. Utterly irrelevant. Her reputation was not tarnished at all within Labour. What it was Morgan well, okay, I don't want to cast aspersions. It was people in number 10 who were having a pop at the fact she was getting paid. She's this gobby woman getting paid more than the Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister gets paid bog all. That's the reason. She wasn't being given a very high salary. The Prime Minister just gets paid sod all, that's all. It's not the chicken feed that Boris Johnson's described it as. But compared to, like, if you compare it to the role of, like, very senior people in an organisation, it's nothing. No one would work as a CEO in a big organisation for what the Prime Minister gets paid, but he's the CEO of the bloody country, right? It's madness. But at the same time, you can't really change it now because it would look really bad to, like, treble the Prime Minister's salary, even though it should be, at least, treble the Prime Minister's salary during a cost of living crisis. But some people in Downing Street had a pop at it, and as a result, Morgan McSweeney got complete control over the Downing Street operation, the 10 Downing Street operation. That's all I'll say about it. So whether it was Morgan McSweeney behind it or just some people who were on his side, it really doesn't matter. The bottom line is it was just a self-defeating power play. Sue Gray would have been superb in the role. She was exactly the right sort of person. It's absolutely a brilliant pick. If you want to know how to hit the ground running really quickly in government, you get someone in who knows how Whitehall works. And look at what's happened. Misstep after misstep after misstep. Not all of those would have been blocked by Sue Gray, by the way, because political missteps are nothing to do with her. But in terms of the administration, it would have been a lot smoother. So now they're having to learn on the job. Starmer doesn't know how to get things done in Whitehall. McSweeney doesn't know how to get things. They're learning on the job. Everyone in 10 Down Street's learning on the job. Sue Gray knew the job and they got rid of her. Stupid. Someone's just said, can Starmer turn it around? Of course he can. He could turn it around almost instantly. It's easy. But they need the know-how and they need the ability to do it. They have to actually fundamentally, they have to stop blaming others. They have to stop blaming the civil service. They have to stop blaming the media. They have to stop blaming Nigel Farage. Stop bloody talking about Nigel Farage. And they have to start bringing it home to them. I'll give you an example, because sometimes things are other people's fault as well. Like the media, yes, the media is not informing the public, but you've got to factor that in. I'll give you a story. When I learned a really powerful lesson in my life, and it was, so when I was a younger teacher, you have lesson observations, right? And sometimes they'll go well and sometimes they won't go well. And this one person was doing my lesson observation and I already had the ump on because she wasn't a teacher. She wasn't a qualified teacher. She didn't come from an academic background. She just was good with the gab. She got herself put in a senior position in this college. Didn't know anything about teaching as far as I was concerned. And my results were good. So although I would have been a bit cocky, I was a young bloke, right? A bit cocky, sure. But nonetheless, I used to get good results. And I'm not saying I didn't have things to learn. I'd still have things to learn now. But I used to get good results, right? She comes in, does an absolute hatchet job on my lesson, right? So we're having a debrief and she says, blah, 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 blah. So she thinks I did a particular thing wrong, which I disagreed with, right? So I then said to her, so what would you have done? And she told me. Then I said to her, but don't you think that if I'd have done that, this, and this would have happened? And she agreed with me. So I'm thinking, vindicated, you're talking shit, right? And I wasn't in your face. I just said, but, can you see that this is the reason why I won't do it? And she agreed. And then she still gave me a really bad grade. And I was incensed. And I was absolutely furious about it. And then what happened a few years later, I just suddenly switched. Something in my head switched. And that's just one example, by the way, but just to give you another example. And I just thought to myself, there are times in life when people will shit on you and it's not fair. But if you want to, who's going to suffer from it? If it's you that's going to suffer from it, then you're the one who's going to have to fix it. It doesn't matter, it's someone else's fault. If you're the one taking the consequences, you need to be the one to fix it. So later on in my career, again, I had another, grade. And even when my own boss was reading the report, they looked at the script of it, the writing, the comments, and they said, this isn't a... I was given a 3, by the way. 1 is your outstanding, sun shines out your arse. 2 is good, that's where you want to be. 3 is, isn't very good, Phil, is it really? And 4 is, can you apply for another job with all haste? So I got a 3, right? And even my boss looked through this thing and says, this isn't reading like a 3, this is a 2, what are they doing? And if it would have been a few years earlier, I would have said, this is absolutely disgraceful, for Christ's sake. But I didn't. Because at this point, something had flicked in a light had switched on in my head, where I just thought, do you know what? Life's a lot simpler if you just go, is this negatively affecting me? Yes. Can I fix it? Doesn't matter if it's someone else's fault. Can I fix it? Yes, then I will. And then my life is a lot better. So I went, yeah, it's fine. It's not a problem. And I, had another observation, because if you get a 3, you have another observation a little bit later. And I got a 2. I didn't make a fuss. I knew it was someone. I don't know whether there was some agenda like, oh, it's the new guy. We'll just, because I was new to the place. It's the new guy. We'll just like make him not think he's going to get an easy ride here or something like that. I really didn't know what it was about. The comments didn't read as a 3. They read as a 2. My own boss said that. Various other colleagues who read it said the same thing. And they weren't trying to flatter me. So, and I just said, but I just went, no, it's fine. No problem. No problem. I'll just, they'll do another observation. I'll get a 2. And I did. And it was easy. And since then, my life got a lot less complicated. life gets a lot less complicated when you just say, instead of trying to find blame, even when that blame is genuinely on someone else, if you just say, can I fix this? And if so, I'll just fix it. I'll just fix it. And they need to do that in 10 Downing Street. It doesn't matter if Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney thinks it's other people's fault or something like that. Can they fix it? Of course they bloody can. It's the Prime Minister and the Chief of Staff. So of course they have the power to change, and that's what they should do. They should think, look, the media are shit. You know, people don't appreciate, the public don't appreciate that some of these things are going to take time. All this thing, blah, 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 blame, 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 blame wherever you like, throw blame wherever you like. Doesn't matter. What can we do to fix it? If 10 Downing Street took that approach, they would, if they, instead of thinking, don't even think about whose fault something is. The first question should be, can I do something about it? And if the answer is yes, doesn't matter whose fault it is, get it done. Unfortunately, Morgan McSweeney's example of the Peter Principle, very possibly, but this happens a lot. It does happen a lot. It's going to happen a lot in politics. You just have to accept it. But it is what it is. I think most people seem to think civil servants only exist in the corridors of Westminster. When you work in public services, you are a civil servant. Yes, you are. But I mean, when we talk about this, we talk the civil servants. When we talk about Whitehall, we specifically mean the civil servants who are enacting. They're coming up with practical ways to enact government policy. Civil servants more widely are the ones who are just like, you know, managing public services. Have I watched Ed Miliband on the Leading podcast with Campbell and Stewart? No. Ed is a proper lefty lot. I haven't. I mean, all I can say about Ed Miliband is he was another important lesson. I've learned lots of lessons in my life. I think that is the trick to life, by the way. If you want a happy life, learn lots of lessons. I always remember there's a quote. I can't remember the exact words, but it doesn't matter. And he was a Scottish surgeon who was the inspiration. He was a friend of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and he was the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes's deductive reasoning. And but he had a bit of a saying that it's always very pleasant to be right, but it's a much more useful thing to be wrong. And the reason for that is because when you're wrong, it's not like try and be wrong. It's not try and make mistakes. But if you make a mistake, you have an opportunity to learn. And I think I might have mentioned this before in a previous thing. I remember I took that to heart when I was quite young. And it is like every time something goes wrong, try to learn the lesson from it. Doesn't matter how bad it is. Obviously, if things go really badly wrong, you might be depressed. You might not be in the best state to learn lessons. But where you can, just try. Whenever anything goes wrong, small or large in your life, try to think, can I learn something from this? Because at least then you might not repeat the bloody mistake. And even again, going back to my earlier thing, it might not be your mistake. It might be some other bugger that's done it. But could you have done something different to avoid the consequences for yourself at least? And, you know, I remember one time giving some test papers back to some students. This was much later on in my career. And this is just probably a few years before I started to do YouTube. And one girl in my class, my physics class, got 100%. So I gave the papers back to everyone. And then I stood at the front. I was probably embarrassed there. I stood at the front of the class. I said, look, I've got a bit of an apology to make, everyone. So-and-so got 100% in the test. So I need to apologise to her. Because what I used to do, and this is quite normal, by the way, you know, when you give a test paper back, you don't just want them, because most kids, right, if you give them a test paper, either look at the score and go, oh, that's all right, and chuck it in the bag, right, and they never look at it again. You want them to look through and learn lessons. So I used to get them to do a little exercise where they'd look at, you know, in particular, I'd got them to do several things, but in particular, I would want them to look at where they lost marks, but they, without really going in depth, they could straight away see why they'd lost them. So those are the easiest lessons to learn. So I wanted them to try and learn some lessons. And I apologised to her because she couldn't learn any lessons because she's got full marks. And I said, don't worry, it won't happen again. It never did, by the way. But yeah, that's the thing to do. You learn and that's what, you know, they should be doing in Downing Street right now. They should be learning lessons. My worry is that instead of doing that, they're doing what a lot of people naturally do and go on the defensive. Totally the wrong attitude. Embrace failure. Don't seek it out. Don't try to fail. Who would do that? But you will fail. And when you do, try to learn the lesson and get stronger from it. You know, this was like when I used to play World of Warcraft reasonably competitively. And this is the thing they would always say, like, you know, the mark of a good player is someone who didn't repeat mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. You make loads of mistakes, right? The difference between a good player and a bad player is a good player doesn't make the same mistake. They might make a different mistake next time, but they won't make the same one because they've learned from it. You know, there's so many ways just to make life so much easier and more productive. But anyway, sorry, Ed Miliband. I was going on about Ed Miliband. And so I learned a really important lesson in politics with Ed Miliband. So 2010, Labour lost the election. Gordon Brown stepped aside. Ed Miliband became the leader. Now, I wasn't in Labour at the time because I was not happy with them over the Iraq War, but we won't dwell on that. But I was still Labour supporter, just like I'm not in Labour anymore now, but I'm still a supporter, right? I haven't gone, oh, I'm going to the Greens. No, I'm still a Labour supporter. But at the time, I still showed an interest. And I used to talk to some people who were still in Labour, and the general, so there were several people in it, but it was basically between Ed and David Miliband, right? And the general view amongst the people I was talking to, and it's the image I got as well, is David Miliband was just a bit too smarmy. He was sort of second-hand car salesman vibe. You didn't really trust him. Whereas Ed Miliband was like genuine. He came across as very genuine, very affable. You know, you really thought what you see is what you get. And so I supported, and I was pleased when Ed Miliband won. Then over the next 5 years, but I'll tell you something else. Even at the time, I thought to myself, I think David Miliband will be a better campaigner. So why did I support Ed Miliband? Because I thought Ed Miliband would be good enough as a campaigner, but also a more genuine, leader, right? And of course I was wrong, because I'm not saying David Miliband definitely would have won, because we can't know that. I think there's a good chance. But we know that Ed Miliband, it's not just that Ed Miliband lost. You could see he wasn't up to it. He might ironically be better off now. It might have been better if he'd not won it and was ready to be leader again. Now, I'm not sure whether people would give him another crack, given that not just that he was a former leader, but that he was a former failure, a big failure of a leader. It could be like it's too late for him, I don't know. But he might actually be much better now with more experience. But at the time, absolutely woeful. He was... it's not just that he lost. It's like you could tell how he lost. Everything was really bad. And so I learnt a lesson then. I thought at that point, I am never again going to consider anything other than which leader or potential leader do I think is the most likely to win the next election. So, because the problem is I'd come from this point of, I think the Tories are going to lose the next election because, first of all, they didn't win an outright majority. So I thought the country weren't convinced in the first place. And I thought with austerity, like with Brexit, some people thought with Brexit, I thought with austerity, things would be so crap that the Tories would just lose their reputation and would go back to Labour. So I actually thought we could take a hit on someone who wasn't as sharp on the camera, who wasn't as charismatic. And I was wrong. And I'll never do it again. I will always support now, even though the next time I may not be able to vote for it again. But I will always support the one I think who can win because it's too risky not to. Thoughts on Reeve's pension reforms. The more I think of them, the more I don't like them. We need to get more people more involved in retirement planning. It's just an investment gambit. I honestly don't know. Again, I approve of the... See, there are some, I think, useful things in it. It is... I think some of the... Because I don't think she's not announced them yet, has she? I've not missed anything. I think some of the ideas would actually increase people's pension pots from employers as well. So that would be a good thing. but also one of the ideas behind it really is to try and stop people just saving in pointless things. Like one of the ideas is about, I think, not directly related to pensions, but cutting back on how much you can put in an ISA, just a normal ISA, which I think is a good thing. You know, like if you're going to give a tax break, you give a tax break to something that's beneficial. It's not beneficial for people to put their money in a pot and leave it and doing nothing. It is beneficial for people to invest that money. I do accept that. I think, you know, if we, particularly as it's easy these days. So, I mean, I have just this year got an investment ISA. People can do that. You can do that if it's, as long as you understand it's a long-term thing. Because my investment ISA, thanks to Trump's tomfoolery, is technically worth less than the amount I've put into it. Not by much, like literally a few quid. But over time, it'll be worth much more. So, you know, you could do... So some of the reforms I do think sound quite good. Some of them I'm not convinced about, but I'm not an expert. So, and I'm also aware, like normally you would think in a situation like this, well, I'll just read what the Financial Times say about it. But I am also aware the Financial Times are a very good newspaper because they will publish the truth. But some things are nuanced. And I also know that the Financial Times is on the side of investors, right? And that's partly why it publishes the truth about things, because it needs, its customers are investors. Most of the people who buy the Times, Financial Times, are investors, and they need accurate information. So they're not going to lie that some madcap scheme by a chancellor is going to be good for the economy when it's not. But at the same time, you also know they're pro-investor. So if there's something that encourages investment but may not be the best in terms of security, the FT are probably not going to be informing him that. So unfortunately, I'm not really sure where the accurate information comes from on it. Would I support a Labour version of Bojo over Keir Starmer? Depends what you mean. Like, it depends what you think about Boris Johnson. If you think about someone who's just charismatic, again, it depends on what they're going to get done. I don't support Labour just to be in power. I want them to do things when they're in there. You know, I used to say for years on this channel before Labour came to power again, that in opposition, the Labour leader has one job: win power, become Prime Minister. That's it. It was a criticism I had of Corbyn. It's what I said all through the Starmer years. The leader of the opposition has one job: become Prime Minister. After that, they have lots of jobs. I don't want them to just seat fill. That's what the Tories do. I don't need to support anyone if all I'm interested in is I'm not interested in a particular colour of party. I'm interested in what gets done. So as Boris Johnson couldn't be bothered, it's not like he didn't want to do some of the things he said he was going to do. He just couldn't be asked to do them. There was no follow through. Some of the things he promised to do were never going to get done. They were impossible. Some of them were possible, but he couldn't be asked. And there were too many vested interests working against it, and he couldn't, you know, like levelling up. He could actually, do you know what? He could have narrowed the gap. Could have done that. Didn't. Because it would have been difficult. It wouldn't have been easy. Because it would help shore up his support in the red wall, but it would piss off people in what we now call the blue wall. So it would have been politically very difficult, and he's not into difficulty. In fact, I was reading something recently, an actual friend of his, an ally, saying Boris doesn't do brave. So even people who know him knows that he's not about the hard slog. FT readers own the economy. Well, I'm one of them. I don't own the economy. But yes, they you know, yeah, they are the... All papers lobby for someone, and they lobby for investors. Yeah, so... Basically, yeah, the people who own the country. So it means a lot of what they write is really valuable. It's really good insights. But you always have to be aware everyone has an angle. Everyone has an angle. And their angle is what's good for investors. We need to be teaching the next generation's critical thinking. Yes, life skills, and recognise each child's different. Current education systems geared up so pupils learn how to pass exams. Yes, this is correct. The thing with the critical thinking is, however, it's not even just a case if you need to do it right. Do you know what? You don't. You just need to get it done. Get started on it, and you can learn. You can effectively learn on the job. It is better to teach critical thinking sort of, I won't say badly, but it is, than not at all. So just get started on it. But it's something that needs to be done over a very long time, generations. And this is the problem. And it can be a bit defeating because Labour could be in power for 15 years and they could start teaching critical thinking to every age group from next year. They're not going to, but they could. And all they will get out of it is one generation of critical thinkers, which is better than nothing, but it's not enough. So it needs to be something the whole country gets on board with, but the Tories are absolutely anti-critical thinking. We need to persuade the Conservatives that it's in... See, the thing is, with critical thinking, do you know what? This is my argument to the Conservatives. With critical thinking, the Conservative Party could exist. With critical thinking, Reform UK could not. That's how I would put it to them. Right? We know that the Tories traditionally benefited from a lack of critical thinking because the media would sell their story, but now they're not. Some of them are selling Reform UK story. Whereas it is actually possible for people to genuinely believe in conservative policies. Right-wing policies, socially conservative people can very genuinely make an argument. Just because I disagree with it doesn't mean to say it can't be valid. So that party could exist with critical thinking. It could attract some supporters who are capable of critical thinking. Reform UK cannot. Reform UK cannot get supporters who have critical thinking skills other than those who think they're going to personally profit from it. But in terms of the masses, no, it's not possible. Which shows you just how little critical thinking there is. Like literally all of the other mainstream parties could absolutely appeal to critically thinking people. Reform UK are the only mainstream party that could not possibly do so. Could Labour fall in a frog in a cooling pot trap where things get slowly better over time but the public don't notice and don't give Labour credit for improvements? It is possible, but I suspect not straight away. I think that's more of a problem for later. I think that's what did for Labour, you know, or was going to do for Labour before the banking crash. Because even 2005, remember, that was before the crash. Things were still getting better, but they didn't win a resounding victory. Now, there could have been a few issues there, but I think one of the issues was, you know, the big stuff was done and they weren't... There were other big things they still could have done, but they seemed to lose a bit of ambition and people picked up on that. But I think initially, I think a lot of the improvements will be noticeable. Now, if they're not, then yeah, they're basically knackered. Because we know their comms is useless. And I don't think we're going to have... I don't think there's going to be an epiphany in Labour. I think Labour might slowly improve. Now, when I keep saying, like, I've not noticed any improvements in Labour comms, that is true. That's not hyperbole. But I know some other people who have said, for example, their TikTok game seems to be better these days. Now, I don't know whether it's consistently better, but it has been better. It's getting hot in here. Fan on. But I don't use TikTok, so I couldn't possibly comment on that. Same with Instagram. I only use YouTube and Twitter, and they're not getting any better on that. And I wouldn't necessarily notice on Twitter because they'd be throttled anyway. Whereas YouTube, they're not. So, yeah, the fact... So I think maybe they might slowly improve, but still be far too far behind. Over there saying teaching critical thinking starts at home. Yeah, but it can't, because if parents don't have critical thinking skills, you can't teach it to kids. There'll be some parents with critical thinking skills who don't necessarily think about teaching their kids actively. They may assume because they picked it up. Like I wasn't taught it by my parents or at school. You know, I picked it up, especially when I went to university, where it was very important. Doing physics, critical thinking is incredibly important. But also getting interested in politics as well. Whereas, you know, if you come from that, if you learnt it, now you just might assume your kid will in time. But there's most parents don't actually have the critical thinking skills themselves, so of course they can't teach you. So we can't start it from home. It has to start from school. It has to be driven by the government. Has to be. Ignorance is strength could be Farage's motto. Indeed, 1984. Absolutely. It's the same with, Farage and MAGA are two sides of the same coin. They really are. They are, ignorance is strength. Freedom is slavery. Freedom is slavery. It's the other one. That's where MAGA are now. Reform UK are still not quite there yet. That's where MAGA are now. I have to know why something's done a particular way. I like to know the reasoning behind decisions. Yeah, some people do. I had a student a few years ago. It's now quite a lot of years ago, actually, I suppose. It was the same as in my GCSE class, and he loved the fact that I would explain to him the nitty gritty, because he'd been used to teachers who would just like you say, teach him to the exam and stuff like that. Well, this is what you need to learn for the exam. And I'd do the same thing, but I would also explain how the principles work as well. And his mum used to say to me for years afterwards, he sort of thought I was like this physics god just because I would explain things to him. Because he seemed interested, and I will always explain things to people if they're interested. A lesson that my dad taught me was always think why people are telling you things. You could do that. I suppose where that falls down a little bit in terms of politics is you can and this is what the Tories and now Reform UK want you to believe. You can always imagine any politician has an ulterior motive and may not be entirely genuine with it, even if they are. But then it's no bad fit. It's better to be critical of all politicians than of none, or even not of some. Biggest problem, politics is the personality cult, or as James O'Brien would say, footification. Even happens with Apple fanboys. They can't ever be or do wrong. Yes, but again, a lot of that comes from the lack of critical thinking. There is a point where even people with, I will accept, with critical thinking skills normally, if it's like someone that they think is on their side or something, they'll tend to give them an easier ride, or they'll just naturally believe them when they come up with something. Yeah, there is a bit of that. But ultimately, it's just people. Like, this is why I studiously, when people say, oh, you're a Starmer supporter. No, I'm not. I'm not an anyone supporter. My wife is the only person I support. Anyone else, unconditionally. No one else gets my support unconditionally. I'm not a Starmer supporter. I'm not an anyone supporter. When someone does something that I approve of, I'm a supporter of that action. When someone does something I disapprove of, I disapprove of that action. And again, this goes back to my teaching days. You're taught, you'll get a situation where, let's say you've got a kid who's a bit of a dickhead, let's be honest. And, you're always sort of correcting their behaviour. They go, oh, you don't like me, sir. The stock answer for a teacher in that situation you're taught is, I do like you, I just don't like your current behaviour. And then, of course, when they exhibit some good behaviour, you're supposed to be all on it with the praise. There, that's brilliant, fantastic, excellent, well done. Even if all they've managed to do is get through a lesson without dribbling. But that's the attitude to take, I think. Don't be a supporter of people. Don't blow smoke up people's arse. No one's brilliant. No one. Everyone's just like everyone else. Sometimes someone will do or say something you approve of, and you can express your approval. But always understand, absolutely everyone that you think you approve of will do or say some things that you disapprove of, and just make peace with it. The difference for me between people is not between the people I approve of and the people who I disapprove of. It's between the people who are honest and genuine and the people who are not. The grifters are the ones I'm against. They're the only people in terms of people, I disapprove of. The ones who are knowingly, maliciously, exploiting people, quite frankly. Those are the only people I don't like. In terms of everyone else, then I just accept that there's some things they do I approve of and some things they do I don't. When I was at school, most of the teachers taught from a textbook, which basically meant copying down from the textbook especially in the lower sets. Yeah, that's more of a lower sets thing. We did actually have that. I was supposedly in the upper set of French, and we had that. You know, a teacher would come in and truck us a tricolor, name of the textbook. Oh, page 34. And he'd just sit at the front muttering something, and that would be that. So, and I'm not very good at French, funnily enough. To be fair, I wasn't ever keen on French. So, you know, that was my not being good at French was a combination of the textbook learning, which isn't very good for learning languages anyway, and the fact that I had a real problem with the fact that French couldn't decide what bloody rules. I loved German. German made sense. You learn some German and you apply some German. It's easy. French, it's like, okay, right, we're going to learn this phrase now. Okay, right. And then, because it's too Latin. And then you find out, you know, you can't just change it slightly to say something a bit different. It's like, and you don't pronounce half the letters. It's like, what? And also one of my French teachers made me try and say it in a French accent, which I just felt was vaguely insulting. Picked up my critical thinking from my granddad and my A-level in maths. I mean, I technically, the first person I suppose who introduced it to me was a mother of a friend of mine. So I learnt my first critical thinking lesson as a result of a mother of a friend at school. But mostly it was an interest in politics and reading from different, because that's the important thing. You can fall into a rabbit hole of reading things that are always from the same point of view. That's what the mainstream media are. Written by the same people who went to the same universities and had the same lives and same upbringing. Even the ones that are very different. Like, not all of them are Tories, but they all had that same upbringing and same life experiences. So they write from the same perspective, even when they're trying to argue different things. And it's an easy trap to fall into if you read too many things from the same perspective. Whereas I suppose I was fortunate reading things from different perspectives. But also, you know, learning physics or any science is going to teach you critical, because you have to be. You know, you really do have to consider everything. How much can you believe this data point? I obviously had my French teacher, Phil, his nickname was Mumbles and he was senile. Yeah, we had a different nickname for this French teacher because he used to get a little bit too excited looking at the girls. This was a long time ago, I hasten to add. What am I hoping or expecting from the defence review out this Monday? Just that it makes sense. I won't actually be looking at it, so I probably should finish off by just pointing out, if I haven't already, I won't be around on Monday. So I'm going to London tomorrow. So actually, let me show you what I've done. I've got so many videos teed up. I've never done this before. These are all videos scheduled to come out over the next few days. I've still got one more to do. Actually, ironically, the video where I explain what I'm doing, although that's coming out on Monday, not tomorrow. And it includes quite a big one on Tuesday, like a proper in-depth one. It's a first attempt at an in-depth video. It's going to be quite long, but I'll do a video about it for Monday. So I'm in London tomorrow, so I'm not about tomorrow. I'm not about Monday, and I'm not about Tuesday. I should be back on Wednesday. If I'm not back on Wednesday, then the werewolves have got me. That's how I'm going to describe that. But yes, it's... So I won't actually be... I won't be able to catch up with anything at all until Wednesday. And then I'll probably be... Because I'm a terrible introvert. So the idea of going to London for basically 2.5 days... that is going to drain my social battery, like you wouldn't believe. Hopefully it won't be too bad. Should we set up a search and rescue team for a trip to London? No, I will explain on Monday, but my point will be, the point I shall make is, if by Wednesday videos are not coming out properly, it'll be too late for a rescue party, so you'll just have to avenge me instead. Wishing you a safe journey to and from... Okay, I can do this. I know. It'll be fine. But these things, they take some time for me to recover. Fortunately, the next trip to London should not be until October with the Rejoin March. So I should have a good long time to actually recover. Although I do have to go to Lincoln at some point in the summer for an afternoon tea with my wife. I seriously hardly ever leave the house for more than an hour or so. But anyway, there it is. Thanks for coming on, everyone. Have a very good evening. I will report back next week, of course, with what my antics were in London. Have a great evening. And until next time, I'll see you later.